My sister took our family home after our parents died, then asked me for money to fix it. You'd think that sentence alone would earn me a free drink at any bar in the country. But no, apparently this kind of thing happens more often than people like to admit. I live in a small, sun-drenched apartment on the 4th floor of a red brick building, a place filled with books, quiet corners, and the occasional paw print on my furniture courtesy of Socrates, my cat, not the philosopher. Though sometimes I wonder if the cat isn't wiser than half the people I know. The day my sister called to ask for money, I had just finished organizing my spice rack. It was a Saturday morning, the light slanted perfectly across my kitchen counter, and I was trying a new pancake recipe. Cinnamon, cardamom, a touch of nutmeg. My phone lit up with her name and I made the mistake of answering. "Harold," she began, in that tone she saves for when she wants something but wants you to feel like the bad guy for not offering it first. "The house needs work, a new roof, maybe the plumbing. It's just falling apart. And you're doing well, right? Doing well." That's what she called paying my rent on time and knowing how to say no to Amazon at midnight. But let me rewind a little. Our parents passed away within 2 years of each other. First Dad, then Mom. Both gone before I really figured out how to live in a world without their quiet steadiness. The family home, that creaky, charming old Victorian on Sycamore Lane, had been theirs since before we were born. A wraparound porch, 2 tall oak trees out front, a yard that smelled like apples in the fall. My mom used to bake pie every Sunday, the kind of house that breathed memories into the walls. There wasn't a proper will, just a loose understanding, repeated over dinners and holidays. "You two split everything, okay?" My mom would say it like she was assigning chores. At the time, I didn't argue. I didn't need the house. I had a job downtown, a decent apartment, a life built on stability. Candice, on the other hand, didn't just need the house, she wanted it, fiercely. The moment the funeral flowers wilted, she started moving furniture around like she was nesting. "I'll take care of it," she said, almost defensively. "You're not going to live there anyway. It's just practical." She made it sound like a selfless act, like inheriting a 2-story house with original crown molding was some noble sacrifice. I should have pushed back. But grief makes you soft. I just nodded. And Candice? Well, she thrives in the gray areas. In technicalities, she likes to twist facts just enough to make you second-guess yourself. She started calling it her house by the end of the month. I let her. I let her paint the kitchen that weird shade of purple. I let her rip up the rose bushes our dad planted. I even let her throw out the old armchair I used to curl up in during thunderstorms. Because part of me thought, if I don't make a fuss, maybe we can still be a family. We weren't exactly close growing up. Candice is loud, dramatic, and chronically in debt. She chases big dreams with little follow-through. Fashion school, event planning, a vegan meal prep startup that lasted exactly 4 weeks. Our parents adored her, or rather, they worried about her, which for them was basically the same thing. I was the good one. Quiet, dependable, always with a book in hand and a plan for the next 5 years. Candice liked to say I was born 40 years old. She wasn't far off. When I think of the old house, I remember sitting on the porch with a glass of lemonade while Mom trimmed flowers. I remember Dad humming while he fixed the gutters, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the heavy creak of the stairs. Candice remembers parties, playing loud music from her bedroom window, sneaking out. That one summer she broke the living room window trying to impress a boy with her softball pitch. We had different relationships with that house, but I always thought we both loved it. Apparently, love has conditions. When she asked for money, there was no apology, no acknowledgement that she had taken full control without so much as a conversation. Just a casual demand, like it was obvious I'd help. "You want me to pay for renovations on a house you claim for yourself?" I asked. She sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "Oh, come on, Harold, don't be petty. We're family. Funny how family always comes up when someone needs a check." I didn't answer right away. I told her I'd think about it, but what I really thought was, "You have no idea what you've started. My father's funeral was on a gray Tuesday that felt like it had been ripped straight out of a sad indie film. Light rain, overcast sky, people holding umbrellas they forgot to shake out. I remember standing at the edge of the cemetery, listening to the priest say something about a life well lived, while Candice sobbed loud enough to echo off the marble tombstones. She wore a wide-brimmed black hat, like a grieving starlet from the 1940s, and clutched a tissue with more drama than an Oscar winner. Meanwhile, I stood like a statue. I wasn't cold, just exhausted. My grief didn't need an audience. I kept my hands in my pockets, my mouth closed, and my thoughts on my dad's crooked smile and the way he used to whistle Sinatra while mowing the lawn. After the burial, we gathered at the old house. Candice insisted. "It's what Dad would have wanted," she said, conveniently forgetting that just a few months earlier she was already treating the place like her personal kingdom. She played hostess like she'd been preparing for it all her life. There were finger sandwiches and a tray of cookies that looked suspiciously store-bought. She wore pearls, actual pearls, at a wake. People complimented the house. "Oh, it's such a charming old place," they cooed. Candice beamed. "It's been in our family forever. I plan to keep it that way." I said nothing. Not yet. 2 weeks later, she dropped the bomb. We were sitting in the kitchen of the house, Mom's kitchen, the same room where she used to scold us for sneaking extra cookies. Candice had replaced the floral curtains with something beige and soulless. "There's a new will," she said casually, sipping from a mug that read Queen of Everything. I blinked. "A new what?" "Will," she repeated, like I'd just forgotten the English language. "Dad updated it a few weeks before he passed." She slid a manila envelope across the table like she was handing me a hostage note. I pulled out the papers. They were neatly typed, and the signature at the bottom looked off. It had Dad's name, sure, but the slant was wrong. The pressure inconsistent. He had arthritis. He hadn't signed anything that smoothly in years. "This doesn't look right," I said. "It's notarized," she said quickly, too quickly. "Perfectly legal. Says the house goes to me." "And everything else?" I asked. She shrugged. "Split, I guess." There wasn't much else. I took the document to my lawyer the next day. Jerry's office smelled like coffee and caution. He wore glasses he didn't need and always looked mildly disappointed in humanity. He read the will twice, sighed, and set it down. "It's fishy," he said. "But fighting this will be hell, define hell, long, expensive. And if a judge believes she coerced your dad or forged his signature, you might win. But if it's notarized and filed, she's got the advantage." I rubbed my temples. "So what? I just let her have it. She'll make it miserable for you if you don't," Jerry said. Your call. Miserable turned out to be an understatement. The next week, Candice showed up with a lawyer of her own. Some guy with gelled hair and the energy of a game show host. She brought him to the house while I was there packing up some of Dad's old records. No warning. "You're trespassing," she said, arms crossed, as if she hadn't let me in herself. "I have a key," I replied. She turned to her lawyer. "See, this is what I've been dealing with. He refuses to accept the will. I've carried the entire burden of this family, and now he wants to take what's rightfully mine." "Burden?" I scoffed. "You mean the house you didn't pay for?" She launched into a monologue about how she took care of Dad in his final months, how I was too wrapped up in spreadsheets to visit, and how she deserved the house because, quote, "I have a vision for it." A vision. I wanted to laugh, but it stuck in my throat. I left that day without another word. Not because I gave up, but because I realized something important. She didn't want the house because it meant something to her. She wanted it because she thought winning meant power. I wasn't going to play that game, not the way she wanted. But I wasn't going to roll over either. Back at home, Socrates meowed like he sensed I was unraveling. I scratched behind his ears and sat down at my laptop. Time to dig, time to fight smart. Candice had no idea who she was messing with. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and old paper, and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights made me want to blink slower, just to keep my eyes from going dry. I sat on the hard wooden bench beside Jerry, my lawyer, while Candice glided in like she owned the place. Pearls perfectly in place, hair immaculate, and a smile that said, "I'm ready to play." It was the first of 2 hearings, though honestly I lost count somewhere in the middle. Candice's lawyer was a master of theatrics, a fact I learned quickly when her opening statement was a carefully crafted narrative painting me as some kind of villain. "Since she is alleging that I threatened her," Candice declared, eyes flashing like a soap opera queen, "but that Harold never helped our parents, that he was absent when they needed him most." I blinked. Threatened? Absent? I had spent countless evenings sitting by Dad's hospital bed, tracking Mom's medications, juggling work to pay for their bills. But none of that mattered. Candice then called her witnesses, a parade of conveniently available friends, ex-boyfriends, and even Dad's former caregiver, all ready with stories I would politely call questionable. Jerry told me afterward they were clearly paid actors, but the court couldn't see the strings attached. One woman said I was cold and indifferent, another that I was never there. The caregiver claimed I refused to contribute to Dad's care. None of them mentioned the nights I spent driving across town to check in on Dad, or how I'd rearranged my schedule so I could be there during Mom's last days. I sat through it all, gripping the armrest so tightly my knuckles went white. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't crying, I was holding on to the shreds of my dignity. Jerry whispered, "They're setting you up, Harold. Just stay calm." I nodded. At the end of the first session, the judge looked tired, like she'd been handed a Rubik's Cube and told to solve it blindfolded. She said the next hearing would be the final decision. I left the courtroom feeling like I'd been caught in a surreal game show where the rules were made up as we went along. The next hearing was worse. Candice arrived even more flamboyant, draped in a red dress that made the courtroom feel like a circus tent. Her lawyer paced theatrically, throwing out legal jargon like confetti. I watched the judge carefully. She listened politely, but her expression was neutral, the kind that made me wonder if she was bored or just really good at hiding judgment. Jerry whispered that the notarized will was the nail in my coffin. No amount of testimony could override it. When the verdict came, the judge's voice was soft but firm. "Due to the documentation presented, the court rules the house belongs to Miss Candice Reynolds." I felt a strange numbness wash over me, like the world had tilted on its axis and I was falling through the cracks. My sister, my own blood, had legally taken away what should have been mine too. I managed to say quietly, "It's like being orphaned all over again. Only this time, it's forever." Candice smiled triumphant. The witnesses nodded politely. Her lawyer looked ready to pop champagne. Jerry put a hand on my shoulder. "We'll figure out the next steps," he said, but even he didn't seem convinced. On the drive home, the city felt different, colder, sharper, like the familiar streets had betrayed me. I went back to my apartment, where Socrates greeted me with a slow blink, like he understood everything and had no idea how to help. I sat down at my desk and stared at the screen. The house was gone. The memories, the smells, the history, all swallowed up by a legal formality I couldn't fight. But somewhere inside, a quiet flame flickered. This wasn't the end. I moved out of the old family house with little more than a suitcase, my laptop, and Socrates, my cat, who seemed to approve of the change. Or maybe he just liked the new windowsill. The apartment was small but cozy, with just enough room for a little fireplace I found at a thrift store and a library shelf that was quickly filling up with books I'd been meaning to read for years. Starting over felt weirdly refreshing. The first few weeks, I threw myself into work like it was a lifeboat. My job in analytics kept me busy, but the real change came when I started writing articles on the side. Short pieces about data trends, workplace culture, and the occasional personal story disguised as a professional lesson. Slowly, those articles found their way into startups and tech blogs. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was consulting for a few small startups, helping them shape strategy and make sense of their numbers. It wasn't a rocket to fame or fortune, but it was steady, and it was mine. My new routine looked nothing like the chaos Candice had dragged me through. I'd wake up, make coffee, read a chapter from some random book on my shelf, and then settle in at a local cafe with my laptop. Socrates had his own spot by the window, where he could watch pigeons and occasionally bat at a sunbeam. At night, I curled up near the fireplace, the gentle crackle making the apartment feel like home. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by what was lost. Meanwhile, Candice's name kept popping up, in all the wrong places. There were local news snippets about her mounting debts, missed payments, a fire in the kitchen of the family home she now owned. Once there was even a small piece about a failed business deal she'd spearheaded, ending in a messy public argument. For a moment, I felt bad for her. The sister I barely recognized was unraveling right in front of me. But then I remembered the court hearings, how she twisted every story, dragged strangers into our family matters, and ripped apart the only home we had. I let the bitterness simmer, but it didn't consume me. Instead, it turned into a quiet satisfaction. I was rebuilding, brick by brick, in my own way. The house, once alive with our parents' laughter and the smell of Mom's apple pie, was now a shadow of itself, peeling paint, broken windows, and silence where memories once lived. But me? I had a fireplace, a cat named Socrates, and a life I was finally proud of. Starting from scratch wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the hum of the city fades just enough for you to hear your own thoughts. Socrates was perched on the windowsill, watching the last sliver of daylight disappear behind the skyline. I was halfway through an article draft when the doorbell rang. Unexpected. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this hour. The city had that subtle chill in the air now, the kind that makes you pull your jacket tighter. But I still wasn't prepared for what, or rather who, stood on my doorstep. Candice. There she was, standing in the hallway just beyond my door, wrapped in a coat that looked far too expensive for someone who'd been dodging bills like a pro. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and there was this faint shadow under her eyes, like the light inside her was flickering, threatening to go out. No apologies. No, hey, I know I've been a nightmare. Just her usual bluntness. "Harold," she said, voice tight, "the house is falling apart. I need money to fix it." She paused, eyes flicking over the modest surroundings of my apartment like they weren't sure how to react. Then she added, "You're doing well for yourself. You could help." I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process the absurdity. The sister who tore apart everything we had, who took our parents home with a storm of lawsuits and forged papers, was now knocking on my door, hat in hand, asking for help. I cleared my throat. "You want me to help you fix the house you stole from me?" Candice blinked, like I'd just spoken in some strange foreign language.
Yeah.
Then her usual act kicked in, the one where she turned the whole world into a stage and played the victim. "Harold," she said, voice soft but carrying that unmistakable edge of manipulation, "let's not drag up the past. It's all happened. Done and dusted. This isn't about that anymore." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Let me think about it." She didn't say another word, just gave me that look, the one I knew well from childhood when she wanted something and wouldn't take no for an answer. We moved inside to the kitchen, the air thick with unspoken words. Candice looked around, eyeing the little fireplace, the books on the shelves, the small pots of plants I'd managed to keep alive despite my notoriously black thumb. "So," she prompted, voice eager but cautious. I took a sip of water, savoring the moment. "Do you really think I'm that naive, that I'd just hand over money to fix a house you didn't earn?" She bit her lip but didn't answer. I added, "You ruined the family. You used every trick in the book, and now you want a bailout?" Candice shrugged, a faint smile playing on her lips. "We all make mistakes. Maybe this is my way of making it right, sure." I studied her face, the tiredness, the desperation barely masked by her usual bravado. Somewhere beneath it all I could see a flicker of the sister I used to know, before the greed took over. Maybe. But I wasn't about to hand her the keys to my trust again. So I said, "I'll think about it. No promises." She nodded, and that was enough for her to take the hint. As she left, I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, the weight of everything settling on my chest. Part of me wanted to slam that door in her face. The other part, the part that missed the sister I once had, wanted to believe maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something different. But I wasn't about to make it easy for her, not this time. I told Candice to meet me at the cafe downtown. I framed it as a casual sit-down to discuss the terms of her request. Truth is, I wanted to see if she'd show up and what kind of act she'd put on this time. Spoiler, it was something. The cafe was one of those cozy spots with mismatched chairs, exposed brick walls, and a playlist that felt like it belonged to a film about complicated family drama. Fitting, right? I arrived early, took my usual corner seat by the window, and ordered a coffee strong enough to keep me alert for the upcoming circus. One by one, they trickled in. First was Mrs. Campbell, our parents' next-door neighbor. She had witnessed every family disagreement and then some. Then Mr. Brown, my father's former lawyer, a man who always smelled faintly of cigar smoke and disappointment. And finally Bill, the owner of a local construction company, the guy I'd hired for an unofficial assessment of the house's condition. Candice walked in last, swathed in her usual designer coat, but with that familiar flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. As she spotted the group, her confident smile faltered for the briefest second. I gestured for her to sit, and she obliged, though clearly outnumbered. "Let's get to it, shall we?" I began, voice smooth and calm. Mrs. Campbell was the first to speak, her tone almost amused. "Candice, remember when you told me you had Dad's will all figured out, but it turned out you didn't?" Candice's eyes darted nervously. I was just trying to protect the family's interests," Mr. Brown chuckled dryly. "Protecting your interests, maybe. You found documents that conveniently surfaced after the will was lost. Some of us aren't convinced," Bill chimed in, "and don't forget the signatures." I had to double-check the contractor approvals. Some looked a little too perfect. Candice's composure started slipping. "This is some kind of setup, isn't it?" I smirked. "If it is, it's a pretty elaborate one." "But the facts don't lie." I slid a folder across the table toward her. "Here's the repair estimate, nearly double what you admitted, and a little something extra." I pulled out a card and handed it to her. The room was silent for a moment, then Mrs. Campbell let out a low chuckle. Candice looked around, realizing she was outmatched. "So, what now?" I leaned back, feeling like a maestro conducting a symphony of awkwardness. "Now, you take responsibility. Or at least, start explaining to the people who actually know the truth why this mess happened." Candice's face was a study in frustration and begrudging acceptance. The bravado was gone, replaced by something eerily close to humility. I glanced at the group. They were all watching her with varying degrees of judgment and sympathy. "Maybe this meeting was exactly what you needed," I said quietly. "To see you can't keep rewriting the story without consequences." Candice's eyes met mine, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw the sister I once knew. But the moment passed. She stood up, tugged her coat tighter around her, and said, "I'll think about it." As she left, the group dispersed, and I stayed back sipping my coffee, savoring the quiet satisfaction of a well-played hand. The house wasn't just a building, it was a story, messy, painful, but real. And this chapter, it was far from over. A month later, life handed me one of those moments where you have to sit back and chuckle. Sometimes quietly, sometimes with that sly grin that says, "Yeah, this feels about right." I found out the family home was sold. Not just sold, practically shoved out the door, fast-tracked and sealed under the hammer by Bill's construction company. The same Bill who'd been sitting across from Candice and me in that cafe, quietly keeping score. The news didn't hit like a punch. It was more like a slow, warm wave washing over me. The house, that wooden relic filled with memories of apple pies and laughter, was going to be torn down, demolished, reduced to rubble to make way for some shiny new development nobody really needed. I had to admit, it was bittersweet. Candice? Oh, she'd already moved on, if you could call it that. From what I gathered, she was crashing at her third boyfriend's apartment in less than a year. Luxury digs, mind you, but that restless fire in her eyes, still flickering, still searching. I met Bill at his office a few days after the sale. His place smelled like fresh paint and sawdust, the air buzzing with the energy of construction projects coming to life. "Harold," he greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. "Glad you could make it." I nodded, settling into one of those stiff leather chairs you find in every office designed to remind you who's in charge. "I have to admit I didn't expect you to go through with it." "The demolition, I mean," Bill shrugged. "Honestly, I didn't want it to be about revenge. I'm not into that. Life has a funny way of balancing things out without us having to intervene." I raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying you didn't tear down the house just to get back at Candice?" "Nope," he said, shaking his head. "Just business. And sometimes business cleans up the messes life leaves behind." There was a silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of pause that feels like a mutual understanding passing between two guys who've been through enough to know when to speak and when to listen. I looked out the window. The city was humming along, oblivious to my little saga. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I curled up in my favorite armchair by the window. Socrates the cat curled on my lap, purring softly. The rain tapped lightly against the glass, a gentle soundtrack to the quiet victory that settled in my chest. Funny how things collapse. Sometimes it's houses, sometimes it's egos. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me, and for the first time in a long while, I realized something simple but profound. I only paid for my coffee.